Next up, a conversation with three regional leaders with critically important planning jobs, all of which know how to collaborate for the benefit of all. First up, Joyce Huang, Planning Director for the City of Cleveland under Mayor Justin Bibb. In this capacity, Joyce facilitates the development of the city's long-range comprehensive plan, community-based neighborhood planning efforts, design and architectural review, and regulatory practices such as zoning. Joyce, you can take any seat that you would like to. Joining Joyce is Mary Cierebiej, AICP Executive Director for the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission. Mary is a strategic and mission-oriented individual with 20 years of planning and economic development experience and building strategic coalitions and relationships in both the private and nonprofit sectors. And then rounding out the panel, Mary, thank you. And rounding out the panel is Brian Zimmerman, Chief Executive Officer for the Cleveland Metro Parks. Brian is responsible for the management of nearly 25,000 acres of green space, welcome, sir, in Northeast Ohio, including 18 park reservations, 8 golf courses, and the nationally acclaimed Cleveland Metro Park Zoo. Brian has helped revitalize Cleveland's urban core with the acquisition and transformation of nearly 750 acres of lakefront property, including the recently completed and reconnecting Cleveland Tiger Trails that links more than 66,000 Cleveland residents to Lake Erie and the region's vast networks of parks and trails. And of course, leading the conversation, Stephen Lipp.
Good afternoon. It's great to be with the three of you. We talk all the time, and here we are having another conversation in front of a group, so I think that's fantastic. If I were to title this part, I would call it Getting the Job Done. We have 3 regional leaders here in critically important planning jobs that are related to execution, building on those plans. And these are folks who need to share power and collaborate for the benefit of all. Now, each of you has a passion for planning and, as I say, getting things done. And I want to talk to you about what motivates you, recognizing that you're all collaborators. Joyce, you are the planning director for our biggest local home rule government with authority over land use and planning. Brian, you head our big regional parks agency, which has taxing authority and plenty of land that you either own or lease, but everything you do is in collaboration with local governments. And Mary, you're in a big oversight role at the county, inspiring and leading communities that may not have planning capacity, but you want everyone to see the big picture. So, to find out a little bit more about what gets you up out of bed in the morning and so excited about your jobs, I'm going to start with Joyce. Joyce, you once described city planning as similar to the Japanese art of kintsugi, which is repairing a broken ceramic vessel by using gold to fasten the shattered pieces as a way to highlight imperfections. Can you describe how that vision informs your work?
Sure. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for remembering that metaphor that I used when I first came into this role as the planning director. My first neighborhood that I lived in when I moved to the city of Cleveland 16 years ago was Shaker Square. I love Shaker Square. It is home to me in many ways. And Shaker Square is one of those places that just truly illustrates kind of the divides that have happened all across Cleveland, whether it's the Cleveland border into Shaker Heights, and the differences in infrastructure and tree canopy and in the built environment and experience. And this image is a Japanese art form, and it's truly this idea that even though there have been things that have broken or separated us into different pieces, when we bring it together, instead of discarding it, instead of throwing it away, instead of just creating a whole new piece, you bring those pieces together and stitch it with gold, as you described, but that piece, when it's stitched together with gold, creates a whole new transformed piece. It has a new identity. And really that's the vision carrying forward is what is the gold that's going to stitch us together? And how are we becoming more connected as a community because of that? And so, from that time in Shaker Square all the way up until, now, really thinking about our history, the ways that we have been sadly separated from one another and how we bring people together. So when I think about planning, we as planners, we hold that future vision. We are the keepers of that future vision, and we keep it alive throughout time, so that when it's time to execute and implement, we can really draw from our past and really look to the future.
Yeah, listening to you, I'm thinking the lakefront is definitely a place where some gold can stitch things together in a literal and metaphoric way. Brian, you are not a planner yourself, as I think we discussed, right? But you employ some fantastic planners, and they come up with great ideas. But I'm wondering whether the real magic comes from the way they are able to write grants and use their talents to bring in millions of dollars to design some of the great things that have been accomplished recently. The Tiger Grant projects have been mentioned, including the Wendy Park Bridge. We now have the Cheers project moving together. So many other things that Metro Parks is involved in. Is planning really the secret sauce to actually getting something done?
I think the first question is, where is the gold? Is it in City Hall? Maybe.
5th floor, 501, just kidding.
I really believe, this is my 13th year here, and I think back to William Stinchcombe, who really had a tie back to the city and to this region. He lived in the community, and he was an absolute visionary. So if you look at the original, boulevard system of parks dating way back 106 years, we just celebrated our 106th birthday on July 23rd, and then you kind of lay over the decades of community involvement. We talk about the planners, we talk about opportunity, but it's carpe diem. You got to seize the day. You have to keep moving. You have to take that plan, and you actually have to put it into action. Obstacles become impediments. You have to look for the opportunity to actually achieve it. When you find kind of the lane, for lack of a better word, of where the funding matches with the plan, then all of a sudden you have something that's a lot more synergistic. We've been able to really cross-functionally work between all the different levels because of our regional capacity, the amount of municipalities that we sit in, the work that we can do. We can be that bridge a lot of times where maybe we have a little bit better capacity. Our planners are really second to none. And what I really like about them, it's not about what they want, it's what the community wants. And it's through their lens that we're able to achieve these things. So whether it's the Greenway plan, which I think is really phenomenal, is probably one of the only places in the country that's laid out. And then it's not really about have and have nots, it's about when. When will it come to our area? And to me, it's the right time at the right place. So we're just very blessed to play the role that we can in this community. We're very blessed to be very active. I do also want to clarify the port, ODNR, the city, there are so many involved in that Cheers. It's not just the Metro Park. So, making sure that you give credit where credit is due, because everybody is lifting a huge ball to make this lakefront better.
Mary, the county, as I mentioned, doesn't have control over land use and planning. But under your leadership and that of your predecessors, the county has been the place that sees the big picture and tries to motivate individual communities to become part of that mosaic in which the sum is greater than the parts. And that's true of the vision for the towpath trail, the county greenway plan that Brian just mentioned, and your ongoing work with 26 Cuyahoga County communities on transit-oriented development, zoning. And of course, there's the county's lakefront project. What gets you excited about being in that particular role?
I think, leadership, which of course, I'm happy to see our mayor and our county executive here. I mean, I think I've always been a people person, and I feel that we're always needing to challenge the status quo. Just because something is the way it is doesn't mean that's the way it has to be. I think too often in our communities, things are being done to them versus them having control of planning what they'd like to see in their community. And so I think with my amazing staff, which I cannot brag about them enough, going out to the communities, really listening. I mean, Allison made a really great point. I mean, we plan, but we listen, and we listen to be informed on what the community wants rather than enforcing something on them. So I think going out and being an extension of planning staff for communities that just wear so many hats already that aren't thinking planning day to day, what do they want to see? What's their big trouble spot? Is it zoning? Is it the type of development? Is it access? Whatever it may be. And then as we start looking at things, we see that communities, you're running into the same issues, that everyone's facing the same challenges. We did a survey last year of our cities and said, what are the big things you need help with? What are the big things that you want to see? And it was mentioned earlier, you know, COVID changed the way we behave, and people want to be outside. They want to have access to safe and, you know, accessible ways of getting around, and not just by car. The biggest two things we heard were parks and green space planning and active transportation planning. Now, each city on their own, they cannot set aside the time or dedicate resources to do that. So we are really getting out there and helping, having public involvement meetings, talking with the constituents. And I know a recent example, Warrensville Heights, we're working with them on an extension of their Green Road Park. They've got an opportunity because a former school is going to be demolished. What do we do with that? How do we control what happens in our community to that site? The majority of the attendees at that meeting were seniors, because there's a community center and a senior center. What do they like about the existing park? And, you know, what are things that other people of different ages who don't use the park now would love to see? So I think it's really being in control of what happens to your community and really planning for the future instead of letting things happen to you.
You know, I want to underscore something I'm hearing each of the three of you say in different ways, which is that all of us know we have limited lives to lead, but we are just so interested in shaping the future of our communities. And we feel like we have a stake in that. And this is a very profound human need that we all have. And, you know, right up there with feeling safe, public safety, and, you know, how did the Browns do? So, Joyce, I wanted to talk just a little bit more about public engagement, because you're thinking of new ways to do that. And the most recent lakefront planning series, the one that preceded the one that's going to be here at 3 o'clock on Thursday, you scheduled the meeting so that it would provide daycare, and you included live music as a way to get people to dance together and exercise their bodies before sitting down to listen to, you know, detailed discussion of 12 variations on lakefront traffic plans. Why did you do that? Did it work? Are you doing it again? And what is your thought process behind all of that?
It's a great point. And to underscore what you shared, what you were talking about really is well-being. And that's a philosophy that we are integrating into our community engagement process, which is that it's not just, oh, what do you want to do there and how are you going to have fun, but how does this contribute to your overall well-being, empowerment, your sense of safety, your sense of mastery, as they say. It's like your ability to master yourself and the world around you. But I think that, and not in a colonialist kind of way, but I think that you know, this idea of well-being is critical to the way that communities are involved in the public engagement. And part of the well-being is that we, as established people, are holistic in nature, and there's nothing quite like arts and culture and other elements to really draw out that sense of well-being within us and to connect to one another. And it's actually shown from an organizational studies perspective that as you experience something together, like a dance or music, that you actually become more connected and you're sort of centered into the conversation. This time around, we will have music. We will have an opportunity to engage visually with the plan that's being presented. And we're going to be trying different things, different ways of engaging. You know, big public meetings aren't the only way to engage, so we tried that in the spring. This time around, we're going to have a few really big public ones, but also be out in the community. So we'll be out at the grocery stores every day, Thursday through Sunday, talking with people just in their everyday selves and everyday being. So that is critical to our approach towards engagement.
You know, providing daycare at a city planning meeting is a form of procedural justice. We can talk about equity in terms of what the plan is aiming for, but there's equity in terms of how you get to the plan. Mary and Brian, do you want to talk about your thoughts about that and how the county and how Metro Parks makes it possible for people to participate in these visioning exercises?
I think one great example, Kelly Kaufman's in the audience, you know, during COVID, all bets were off and we were in the middle of planning. And so she created these walk shops, and we actually got to meet people at the park, and we were able to walk with them and kind of work through various groups. Certainly the boards and the sticky notes and all those things continue to work, but you have to adapt. And I think the best thing we can do is continue to adapt the plans, bring them forward. We have a lot of state reps here in the office, state senators. We have to have a plan that they can help back downstate. That's the biggest thing that we need here. They need to be able to believe in what we're doing, how we're doing it, how we're going to deliver it, when's it going to get done, and how can they help fund it. Because absent of that, we won't win moving forward.
Yeah, and I would think, similar to what both Joyce and Brian said, is, trying to meet people where they are. Going out and, again, not just doing email surveys or internet or, social media postings, but paper surveys, putting information and materials about projects in the libraries, in other places that people go on a regular basis so that they can have input. We've done yard signs with QR codes. We're trying to think about different ways. DEI is obviously very important, in our mission, and not just doing things the way we've always done them. And so my team is really, I'm challenging them and they're challenging each other of coming up with creative ways to do that. I just really think that we have to do things differently. I mean, to your point about COVID, we never had a virtual public meeting before COVID. I mean, we learned to turn on a dime and to get people there and have people, and honestly, sometimes there's more attendance on a virtual public meeting than having people come out to go to some place they've never been and get a ride or whatever it may be. So, there's times when hybrid sometimes works differently, and smaller groups sometimes help too, really working with those stakeholders and those key people who can help spread the message, and however it may be. But I just think we have to do things differently, and we're seeing it. And I think just on one other point of DEI, of not just equity pieces, but how do we do our maps, looking at people who are visually impaired. Our GIS team is looking at ways of hatching and shading versus using colors. I mean, there's things that we just assume everyone can see things the way we do. And we know that's not the case. So really being intentional about doing that and looking at ways to change that.
A little commercial here. You have a partner in the media, and you can talk to us. And I would encourage everyone in the room. Obviously, I'm interested in advancing planning projects in Cleveland and Northeast Ohio. I hope you reach out to other outlets, because we can drive attendance to your planning sessions and help you get to that procedural justice. The three of you here, I want to approach the lakefront, and I hope what's going to be an interesting way. First, I'm going to start with Brian. Metro Parks has received so much credit, so many accolades for what the organization has done since leasing the lakefront park reservations from the city of Cleveland. How did you do that?
Wow. That was probably one of the, Debbie Barry's in the audience, one of our former commissioners, that was probably one of the most intricate dances that I think government agencies had to work through to get the alignment of the mayor's office, city council, to get the House aligned, to get the Senate aligned, to get the governor's office aligned, and then bring ODNR into the mix as well. It was an extremely interesting and dynamic discussion. It took a period of years, but it's really interesting to know that William Stinchcomb, again, I go back to him, our planner, founder, engineer, designed one of the buildings that's still in use at Edgewater today. So it's really more of a return for us, the way I look at it, coming back there. But when you look at getting political alignment and getting the will of the people to return them, I want to give credit to the state of Ohio. They did do a lot of really wonderful things, a lot of things that people won't see. Their maintenance towards the end became it became an eyesore for the community. And we took that as a challenge to give something back that had once been here. And we really looked at the full breadth of between Villa Angela, Euclid, Wildwood, Gordon, he's 72nd, he's 55th, the lakefront, meaning Edgewater. It's been a challenge. It's been a great opportunity. Councilman Hairston's in the office playing Griffin, the mayor. We worked hard at bringing Gordon Park South. We really want to, integrate that into the bridge there, where these freeways and railroads broke off parts and separated them. We want to continue to try to pull them back together. The work that's going on in Euclid to bring the trail There are so many wonderful things. West Side mayors, East Side mayors, Inner Ring suburb mayors, we're all working together. So, that was a very interesting civics lesson. Lobbyists, I mean, there was a lot of components that went into it, but who won in the end was the Northeast Ohio residents. And that was the biggest thing that was accomplished out of there.
So, thanks, Brian. So there's a regionalism part of this discussion about working with metro parks, which the city does and the county does, and you all partner on things. Collaboration is so important these days because none of you alone could get big things done around here. So how do you decide among the three of you when it's the city's turn to lead something, when it's the county's turn to lead? I'm going to start with Joyce.
Sure. Well, we communicate a lot, and so we are constantly talking about the big ideas that we have, who ought to take the lead. And I think there are different times when, the metro parks may have particular skill set that they can lead and bring more resources to, or the county. We've seen this through how we've talked about our east side and downtown lakefront in the city of Cleveland. We know that Cheers is an immense effort that we are partnering with all across here, and with our partners at City Council, utilizing our ARPA funds to make sure that we weren't just supporting the things that the city was leading, but also our partners, because it's all of our lakefront. And so, making sure that we are resourcing one another and communicating frequently.
Mary?
Yeah, and I would agree. I mean, I think communication, we always say, is key. I mean, not just at the leadership level, but amongst all of us as directors, and then beyond that, our staff. I mean, they're talking all the time about projects, and we're really trying not to step on anyone's toes or duplicate efforts. It doesn't get anyone any benefit. I mean, Joyce sits on my board. I've got, former board members here, current board members here, talking about things and getting approval on what makes sense for county to lead versus something that it should be more municipality. So even in the county, the Cuyahoga County Lakefront Plan, it really was some deferral to the city of Cleveland for that specific section of downtown, understanding they are doing their own project. We are talking to each other constantly. We're sharing data, but it's something where that is not our place to be, leading the downtown Cleveland lakefront. But we are a stakeholder in that communication. I mean, we are in part of those, conversations all the time in those meetings. And so I think too, it's just of what's the role, and if it's not leading, it's assisting, and it's contributing to the cause.
Great. So we saw Allison Lucasy. Where are you? Hi, good to see you. I want to note, Allison is coordinating lakefront planning projects in the private sector for Greater Cleveland Partnership, which is an important role. But prior to that, Allison was helping to create a new trail in the city of Euclid on the Far East Side, which is based on the innovative idea of exchanging the city exchanging erosion control measures in exchange for public access for a new trail on private property across the lakefront. So that trail now exists. How important is that as a precedent for Cleveland and the rest of Cuyahoga County? I'd like to hear from the three of you about that Euclid project.
I just want to first shout out Allison, because Allison is matchless, like her knowledge and her project management, and I mean, she truly believes with a passion about lakefront access, and deeply believes in equity. And so I think that was a brilliant move by City of Euclid to do that, and we know that Cuyahoga County and your lakefront planning is basically planning that for the Collinwood neighborhood, where there is literally land falling into the lake, and something must be done immediately. And so I want to turn it over to Mary actually to talk about that, but those types of precedents are going to be critical to ensuring access on a lake where 80% of the lake is accessible by private citizens and only 20% is publicly accessible.
Yeah, thank you, and kudos. And I think Jim Sonhalter is here on my team. He's a former City of Euclid employee. Mayor Gale's here, Allison, so the team's all here from the Euclid project, but I live in Lakewood, sorry. I grew up in Euclid, though, so, I get them mixed up sometimes. But, it was a model, and I think it was said earlier, public-private partnership is so essential in getting any of this done. As a private homeowner, if your backyard is falling into the lake, it is extremely expensive to secure that shoreline. And wind and weather and everything else does not know property boundaries. So you may fix your cliff. If your neighbor on either side doesn't, or the neighbor down the street doesn't, it's going to find its way back to you. So I really do think, I mean, the Euclid Beach Connector in Collinwood there, it was the first of the 4 focus groups to move forward. It was really, moved ahead because of an emergency erosion assistance grant by ODNR. It is an emergency situation. These homeowners are losing their land. They're at risk of losing their homes. So it was something that needed to be done quickly. And by talking with all those property owners and getting easements and agreeing to some type of public access, we can access state and federal funding to help stabilize that shoreline. They cannot do that as private property owners. And that's just one example of the focus areas that we're going to see this type of improvement made.
Do you think there's going to be appetite for that kind of thing in even more affluent lakefront communities?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's something where, some people are very happy with the way they are. They've invested millions of dollars as a neighborhood organization for their street to secure it, and they have no interest in allowing any of the public anywhere near their homes. So that will continue, but I think there's more when you see the model of Euclid and how it was a compromise with public access and private. You can't walk up and walk onto their backyard or into their street. There's a gate that's for residents to get up to that access, but along the lake and enjoying the lakefront, which is the plan, there's safe and secure access for the public. So Lakewood is a good example where it is the opposite side of the river. Their bluffs are 60 to 80 feet. I mean, we're talking about a big elevation changes, and the expense in securing those is enormous. So, it's known as the Gold Coast because of all the high-rise apartments there, but just south of that is a very low income, low to moderate income families. And so how do you get those people access to the lake that can't get there now? And so we're talking with, the 13 building owners have agreed to study further, continue the discussions. It is the second of the 4 focus areas looking at how do we improve that. So I think, Allison said in the video, marinas. Don't you think people in the Gold Coast would love to pull up their boat and go to Pier W or go to Summer House? There's some vision that could happen. I mean, it's all about where the money's coming from, but at the same point, they know that there are pools back there, there is infrastructure that is tied to those buildings that they're at risk of losing if they don't have some kind of partnership to make some serious improvements in the coming years.
Okay, so to be clear, we're not looking at a Florida condo collapse situation.
No, we are not.
We're not. Okay.
We are not.
Very important
So,
to
very
get
important.
that
The
out there.
buildings do sit back far enough, but we're talking about green space, pools, other amenities that those apartment units and
Right.
condos offer, and that they are losing land at a rapid pace.
Yeah. Brian, the Euclid example has set up so many opportunities for metro parks to connect the Euclid Creek Reservation. What are your thoughts about that project?
Again, it's transformative. I mean, when you look at communities that are declining populations, having struggles with infrastructure and opportunity, really attracting residents, it's really across the board. Northeast Ohio is not just in Euclid. It could be in Bay Village. It could be in Rocky River. It could be in the city of Parma. We try very hard, and I think when you look at Metro Parks as a partner, our try is to say yes to being that partner, and whether we can play the lead role, whether we can move or find funds. I think the egos get set aside here when you look at Sewer District, NOACA, the Port Authority. I mean, everybody really is trying very hard to bring more resources to this community. So when you start to look at what I call the stitching together of the way we kind of got pulled apart as a community over the last 100 years, there's a lot of really good work. And when you think of, people, kind of point to Edgewater, that's Matt Zone. I mean, that was where his plan came to fruition. And why was that first? Well, it was ready. And that was it was ready for funding. It was ready for opportunity. Metro Parks came in and, it continued to move forward. Then you look at the towpath being completed. Some say it took longer to build the trail than it did to dig the canal. that's probably not too far off, but it's done. Check the box, move on, move to the next. And the Red Line Greenway and what the downtown Rotarians did from their rapid beautification. It's picking things up and making them better for the community. And if we can figure out how to do that, whether it's in Solon, whether it's a trail that's going out to Aurora, we want more people in this ecosystem. We just had an onboarding. We had 10 new employees. 4 of them were from out of state. 2 of them were returners, and 2 of the things they said specifically was the metro parks and the opportunity to help connect the lakefront. So the point is that it is something that this community can get behind. It's something that we need to get behind. There's some big picture items. Looking at one of them, we have to help resolve and make sure that we can stabilize this ecosystem. You also look at the rock hall that we haven't talked about. There's $100+ million that's going to go there. So there is a tremendous amount of activity that people can take credit for. We need to change the narrative of what's being done, not what wasn't done.
I want to zoom back for just a second. I think we're probably heading towards the conclusion of this segment, but are we getting any better at city planning? So many of the things that we're talking about today in terms of barriers and obstacles were set in place by a prior generation. Surely the 3 of you must be thinking about that and what makes this generation different.
Huge question. Well, first of all, I feel...
Make no little questions.
Make no little questions. I feel immense hope for this coming generation. I love young people. I really feel that they care so much about their environment, about community. They don't want to be disconnected. They want to be connected, generally. And I think that as we evolve, we learn more about ourselves. We learn more about our city. As we have more diverse voices in the room, whether it's gender, sexual orientation, racial backgrounds, like even ability, right? As you mentioned, Mary, we learn so much about how to care for one another. I think one thing that's been really striking to me about the lakefront process, which first of all is 20% of the world's fresh water. So we have the responsibility to steward that. It's 80% of North America's fresh water, but also to form the relationship. And I think that that perhaps is a new language, kind of maybe going back to old language, kind of, how our indigenous cultures would think about our relationship to nature. And that I really believe that as we step into this phase of planning, it's not just about what we'll do and what we'll build, but it's really that we all find ourselves in the story of the lakefront, that each community has a footprint, whether it's Station Hope and the Underground Railroad and the pathways towards freedom that led people to Lake Erie, or if it's the indigenous trails that really started the first marks on transportation in this region. The first Chinatown was on Lakeside. I think it's reckoning with our history that we have made barriers for people. We had to have green book sites along the lakefront so that people from our Black community could feel safe, because there were parts on the lakefront that we didn't feel safe. The community didn't feel safe. So I think it's this sort of new era of reconciling our histories, finding ourselves, reclaiming our voices, and reclaiming our narratives on the lakefront, so that as we enter into a phase where we need more resiliency, our climate is changing, we have a lot more political tension, we just really need to come in with new ways of thinking when it comes to our lakefront and planning. And so I think we're stepping into that era.
Yeah. What I think is, so having come from Milwaukee, I'm not from here, so I didn't come to this community with a bias on what was done or what wasn't done or what plan wasn't picked up. Get busy working what's in front of you. And what I mean by that is that, if you've got a plan, you've got to, it's like a dog on a bone. You got to start getting after it, and you got to get it done, and you got to start stacking things. And, we can look back on all these different levels of history and victims and vindications and everything else, but everyone that's sitting in this room has an ownership in what we do for the future. So raise your hand, be present, be accounted for. Most of the decisions are made by those people who show up. You all showed up today, so now you're all part of how we're going to move this thing forward.
I would just say, has it improved? I think tremendously. I also think planning is cool again. I mean, this is something where we're seeing these young generation, I mean, they're coming in. They want things to be different. And I think something that I failed to mention is just really our city leadership, the municipal leaders, the mayors, the city council, county council. I mean, it's like there are people who are making this happen. For us to do a plan that sits on the shelf, that's never what we want to do. We're seeing cities adopting plans and implementing them. And guess what? They're coming back saying, we're done. We want to do this again. What's next? So, I mean, it is something, to everyone's point, that it is something where there is passion behind it. And I think the more things that they see actually coming to fruition, the more excitement there is. I mean, there's two big things that we've worked on. First Suburbs Consortium working on single-family zoning for infill housing. It is something that's happening. It's something where we did a great job historically for demolishing buildings in the foreclosure crisis, but how do we put more of those missing teeth back in? And making sure they're built to fit in with the fabric of the neighborhood. We've got design guidelines. We want to help communities do that. The next thing we're doing is with Cleveland Heights is accessory dwelling units. Back to Joyce's point, how do we care for our parents, our grandparents, and have them living near us so that we're not spending all this time and money and putting them somewhere that we can't see them every day? So Cleveland Heights, kudos to you stepping up. This is not something they've only engaged us to do, but they want to share this information with other municipalities. We're helping. South Euclid just adopted their single-family zoning, some of the work that we did, an overlay for them. Euclid is next. I mean, there's these things where we're not just wanting to do it once. We want to do it once where we're actually helping other people, and county-wide initiatives are letting that happen.
Joyce, you wanted to add something?
I just want to echo planning is cool. It's always been cool, but I'm glad it's cool again. But I mean, honestly, just speaking of collaboration and partnership, the county has been leading on this transit-oriented development work. Yes. And, our staff has been constantly working with Mary's staff at the county on this, and now we're seeing this support for transportation demand management and making sure that, our city is reclaiming its going back to what our old narrative was about the city. So it's really exciting, and it's good to see.
You can't tell we like each other, huh? All of
No,
us.
it's encouraging to see this regional collaboration in Northeast Ohio where we haven't always had it. So we have 2 minutes. Last question, and I'm sorry, another big one. The 4,000-pound monster in the room is the automobile. So much of planning is based on the dominant transportation system. How are the three of you going to ensure that this downtown Cleveland lakefront and the rest of our lakefront isn't jammed up with parking lots?
Transit-oriented development.
That's right. Well, I think that, cars are they've been embedded through generations of just planning that led to it. And so it's going to take some time to get back to balancing our different modes of transportation. So a survey that we did showed that 70% of people are still probably going to drive to the lakefront in some form or fashion. And so we do need to make that provision. But one of the primary goals that we submitted to ODOT as a city was to make the connections and to encourage multimodal connections. And that is top of mind with regard to this particular plan. It's going to take time to shift it, and it's going to take habit change. But my dream is that you can start from the southeast corner of Cleveland and be able to take a mode of transportation that is not a car all the way to the lakefront to experience, what is ours together. So.
Right. Brian.
It's really the 880, whether you're 8 years old or 80, you should be within an 8-minute plus or minus to a park. And I think that's where you have to remove that barrier.
By foot or bike. Yes.
Yeah, you have to remove that barrier because otherwise it's the average of time is like I can get there faster in my car. So you have to change that narrative. But it's also the high quality amenities along the way. It can't be just this corridor. It's got to go through something and it's got to go somewhere, and it also has to be connected. If it's not connected, out and backs just don't work. So 880, 8 minutes, and high quality.
Fantastic. Mary?
Oh, I would just say I would like to thank RTA too, because they've been a huge partner on the transit-oriented development piece. But I think just as a point of example for that, they've got priority transit corridors, and how do you change increasing ridership if the development stays the same as it's been? So making intentional decisions on those, high frequency transit lines to make sure that there's development that supports that. But I also think safety. We talked about it with access to the lakefront on the city streets, how much is dedicated to cars versus bike and pedestrian, protecting the people who are on the bikes and streets by whether it's landscaping or separated lane, but complete and green streets. I mean, these are all things that we are looking at. We're looking at parking codes. We're looking at parking analysis. What are the parking requirements? We just had a workshop with the city of Buffalo. They eliminated all of their parking requirements. And they've seen success in development. So I think we have to learn from other places and help each other to think differently about how we access things.
Well, I want to thank the three of you for helping us to think about the future, and I'm excited to see what's next. I hope the rest of you are too. Please give our panelists a hand. And I'm going to hand it over.